Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on neurodivergence and job hunting and how to showcase your strengths. Today we're joined by a great set of panelists who I will introduce you to in just a moment. But just before that, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lacey. I'm an editor at targetjobs. Today I'm sat in front of a brown door, white walls and wearing a blue jumper. And I'd like to just give you a little rundown on how this webinar will go. So it will last for 1 hour and we'll go through some talking points with our panelists for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to go through your Q&A questions. So to ask any questions throughout the webinar, if you want to put your questions in the questions tab, not the chat tab, just so they don't get confused. And then we will get to them at the end. And if you see any questions in the question box that you think are relevant and you'd like answered as well, give it a little thumbs up and it will boost it to the top. And that way I can kind of go through the most popular questions and get as much value out of it as possible. So yeah, that is how this webinar will go. So I will now pass you over to our panelists to introduce themselves, a little bit about themselves and where they work and what they do. So I will start clockwise on my screen. It might not be the same for you, but I will start with Anne. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Anne Candeloro. I'm currently sitting in the dining room with the blinds are down, so it looks as though it's quite dark, but it's a shame to shut out the sunshine, but it would have created a glare on the screen. I've got shortish white hair ever since COVID. I couldn't dye it through COVID, so given up the dye. And I work for Rolls-Royce in the early careers team, so we manage all the recruitment for apprentices, grads and interns.
Great, thank you. And I will move on to Eloise, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Eloise Thomas. My pronouns are she, her. I work for Informa, which is an events and publishing company in the Informa Connect division, and I'm an internal communications manager. I'm here because I am neurodivergent, I have ADHD, and I'm also the internal colleague or network leader for our disabilities and conditions network called Illuminate.
That's great. Thank you, Eloise. And next up, I go to Lauren, please.
Hi everybody, my name is Lauren MacDonald. My pronouns are she, her, and today I am sat in my spare room. I've got a grey wall behind me, I've got brown hair and a blue top on. So I am a foundation manager at IBM and I run our 12-month placement schemes. So look after all of our interns at the moment who are here within IBM, but in terms of the wider foundation team, that is the home of our early professionals for IBM. So also a bit like Anne covers our apprentices and graduates as well. And I'm here because I ran our first neurodiversity hiring pilot in the UK. So it's really, really good to see people, looking to join.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And next I'll go over to Matt.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt. My pronouns are he or they. I have brown hair covered and hidden under a small beanie, and I'm wearing a pretty colourful band t-shirt with a messy history behind me. So the reason I'm here is that I work for KPMG. I'm a manager in our modelling and analytics team, specialising in financial services. I've been here for 8 years, joined right out of university. And in terms of the reason I'm here, so I have ADHD. I was diagnosed a couple of years ago as an adult. And I'm also on the committee of our neurodiversity community. So involved quite a lot about these kind of issues all the time. So yeah, that's me.
Lovely, thank you. And last but not least, Gemma, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Gemma. I'm a neurodiverse ambassador, focusing specifically on neurodiverse skills. And I also worked for Grace's emerging talent business as one of their leaders. Just to bring that to life a little bit, as a neurodiverse skills ambassador, I work with both the public and the private sector. Within a private sector focus, I typically, although it can include lots of different things, it's really about educating businesses on the benefits and almost the power of neurodivergent skills. And in the public sector, I work really quite closely with educators to co-evolve or co-create strategies that support specifically at this time, send schools and their students to transition into higher education or higher education into the workplace. In terms of a Grace perspective, I actually found Grace through my passions as a neurodiverse ambassador. And Grace, for those that don't know, ultimately is an emerging talent business focusing on hire, train, deploy and develop, which just means that you continuously develop your learning, skills focused while you earn. And I'm here today naturally with a passion for neurodiversity, but as also I am too neurodivergent. And as a leader, I'm really keen to hopefully inspire the next generation on the possibilities that await you.
Great, thank you, Gemma, and thank you to all the panelists for joining today to discuss neurodivergence and job hunting. So yeah, thank you all for joining. So I'll start off with an important talking point, which is, do you welcome applicants from neurodiverse? Do you welcome applicants from neurodiverse students? And if you do, why is it important that you do? So I will just start again clockwise and then I'll mix it up. So if I start with Anne for this one, please.
Thank you. Absolutely, Rolls-Royce welcomes applications from all candidates, but neurodiverse candidates are bringing a different way of looking at things, a different thinking into the business that's evolving and changing. And we desperately need that sort of insight. So we proactively encourage neurodiverse applications. We sponsor the Target Jobs Undergraduate Award for celebrating neurodiverse talent. And through that sponsorship and through that experience, working with a neurodiverse consultant, we learned an awful lot on how we can actually adapt our processes to enable those candidates to be at their best. So yes, we do.
Definitely, that's great, thank you. And if I go across to Eloise, if you've got anything to add.
I'm not sure that I can add so much to that one because I don't work in recruitment, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. I'll go across to Lauren.
Yeah, so absolutely, yes, we welcome applications from neurodivergent applicants. I think, you know, we need to bring that diversity of thought to our teams, and I think that it's just so important not to have, you know, a team of 20 identical people. That would be so boring. And they'd all give us the same answer. And I think particularly in my work within the early professional space, you know, we always welcome all of the innovations, and I think it just contributes towards it. You know, all of the ideas that you bring, the different perspectives, it's just, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, definitely, really important points, thank you. And Matt and Gemma, did you have any input on this question?
Sure, I could come in briefly. So as mentioned, I'm obviously working the team, but also I'm involved in interviews. So I do like first stage interviews for applicants, both at a graduate level and all the way up to like manager applicants of like 5 to 8 years experience. And obviously working in consulting, every client is different and every project is different. And so getting that variety of experience and hence the variety of like problem solving approaches and attitudes is vital to make sure that when you assemble a new team for a new project, you're going to have a kind of diverse set of attitudes, which means they're going to be able to handle the kind of unpredictable challenges that are going to come in during that project. And the only other thing I'll add is you kind of have to welcome neurodiverse applications because we've already got them in our businesses everywhere because there are such a huge proportion of people. So by not welcoming them, all you're doing is like disenfranchising a huge proportion of your workforce who are already in your teams anyway. So you may as well get better at it.
Definitely, yeah, all slightly different insights, but all equally important to note. So thank you. And Gemma, did you have anything you wanted to throw in there?
I think everyone's brought out some really key points and some consistent points that we will recognise the kind of skills that are brought to the table as you have a diverse workforce, right? I would say that absolutely, certainly not in the recruitment process, but naturally as a leader, I have to recruit for my own team. But equally as a neurodiverse skills ambassador and a particularly nosy person, I understand how much we have done that throughout our entire organisation today. And that really does start from the minute that we start to look at attracting and ensure that we've got inclusive language in the way in which we engage, But also, I think the biggest part is then in educating our people, ensuring that they understand the additional needs, but also the benefits of engaging with a complete diverse workforce, particularly within neurodivergent individuals. And then also then how you retain that workforce to gain the best out of them in the workplace. So that we really have looked end to end on how we do that. And I encourage multiple businesses on a daily basis to do the same.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And another important point that I'm sure lots of people will be interested in is how do employers support neurodivergent employees in the workplace, and any kind of formal initiatives or even informal support that you might provide with your company. So if I start with Lauren, as I know you'd already mentioned, do you have any kind of formal initiatives or informal support, as I mentioned, for your neurodiverse students?
Absolutely. So as you can imagine, IBM's a huge company globally, but also in the UK as well. So we have what we call business resource groups, which are kind of a formal community where people can get together. So it's actually under our guise of people with diverse abilities. So neurodiversity comes within that. So there's a global community that people can engage with. We've also got a UK level, so you can engage with more local people, get the support of obviously other neurodiverse people or the managers within the business, and our mental health first aiders and wellbeing trainers. But also that's probably kind of the formal side of things. We also have lots and lots of mechanisms in place where we can provide the support. So even if that's things like needing noise cancelling headphones in the office, or having that, we have quiet areas within the building where people can go and just chill out. If it's all a bit much in an open plan office, sometimes you need that space. Or even it's the accommodations that you can make in terms of just talk to your manager. We can be there to word emails in a certain way, or make sure that I'm the person that needs the lists, the bullet points and the lists in their emails, or it goes over my head. So that's kind of probably more informal, but it's available to you. We've got lots and lots of support across the board, but also I think it's just, for me, it's also been that journey, and that we're also educating the IBMers as well to accept that neurodiversity is human. It's something that we accept and we respect, rather than try to cover up and change and mask. So it's also that training alongside of our existing IBM population, to actually to encourage and accept and respect people, that we're all different and we all think differently, and to be able to put those support mechanisms in place.
Definitely, thank you. I think you touched on an important point there as well, that even if there's an initiative or form of support that might be mentioned on a company website, it's important that if there's something that you feel like you need a bit of advice on, or you'd like to have an open dialogue with, you can just contact your manager or recruiter and just kind of be transparent about what you might need to better perform in the workplace. So yeah, that's really important. Thank you. If I go across to Anne for your input as well.
Yeah, very similar to what Lauren's just said there, actually. We have the employee resource groups, and we introduce those within the recruitment stage. So anybody going through that process has the opportunity to reach out to those groups even prior to joining. And I think a key thing that Lauren put up on there is training our managers. So, how do these conditions present within the workplace, and what can you do to enable that individual to sort of be at the best and make that that atmosphere and that environment the right place for them, and how things present sort of even in the assessment process. So very similar informal and formal arrangements to support neurodivergent candidates coming through.
Definitely, thank you. And if I just go over to Gemma as well, with your experience of being in leadership, how would you say there are informal or formal initiatives that can support neurodivergent employees, students and graduates?
Sure. Some great ones have already been suggested or in action within those organisations. But just to add to that, I think one of the key things is building on your strengths, right? Developing those areas where you're not so strong at, absolutely, but really harnessing your strengths. And that's where we have developed professional development opportunities within our organisation. Our development programme really harnesses and understand someone's individual strengths to build and master those strengths, empowering people to really activate their neurodivergent talents and execute those in the role. So I think that's a key area for sure. It's understanding, learning from an individual, and helping to identify areas that they can then take advantage of to further develop. And I think in addition to some of the other points is also identifying mentors, and they won't always necessarily be within your own organisation. You know, neurodivergence, it's more and more people I think are perhaps becoming more comfortable in sharing this information, whether it's up front or during their employment, but we still don't truly know the number of people that are neurodivergent. So I would empower everyone to build some confidence around it, speak openly, and build a network around that, because there's nothing more powerful than being in a community of people who truly understand and can then build on your and support you through your journey. So I think those are core initiatives that not only an employer can initiate, but you as a neurodivergent individual can initiate.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You've touched on one of the talking points we'll get to a bit later on about disclosure and kind of having, no, it's a great thing. It's a great point, and it will lead us onto our next talking point, which is, you know, it's all well and good knowing, you know, which career path you'd like to go down and some potential employers, but it was also important to discuss how a neurodivergent student or graduate can identify an employer that genuinely celebrates and includes them, is an important part of the job hunting process. So it'd be interesting to get insight from Eloise and Matt first for this one, and if you're comfortable sharing any of your experiences with applying for jobs as well. So if you could, if we start off with Eloise for your input on that talking point.
Yeah, sure. I can touch upon my experience a little bit if that's helpful. So I got my first job outside of university 5 years ago, or 4 years ago now, and I'm still at the same employer, although not in the same role. And when I started to leave university and look for a job, I didn't know that I had ADHD until kind of a few months after I graduated. So I was 23 at the time and I'm 27 now. So I didn't really know, and that was kind of hard. I was getting used to the diagnosis, and I'm still wouldn't say that I'm fully used to it now, but I definitely know myself a lot more, and I think that does help. But I was getting a lot of quite personal feedback that was, I guess, my ADHD showing up in the high pressured environment of an interview. And because I didn't really know how to not mask it, but how to deal with like people saying things that were kind of pointing it out, I think that kind of made the process worse for me. So I think my advice to people looking for a job now would be to look for an employer that does understand neurodiversity, because I didn't really even know that word when I was looking. And I think that would have helped me, because I would have felt more supported if other people understood, and then I would have felt like I could actually say something, because I never did, because I didn't really know how I would be treated. But I still wasn't treated great for not saying, because I was doing things that they kind of didn't understand either. So yeah, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but I think if you do feel comfortable to share it, I think it would hopefully people that understand will be able to kind of support you through it and guide you.
Yeah.
Any sense?
No, definitely, really helpful and really interesting to hear your insight. And like you said, I think one of the most important things an employer can do is try and understand their applicants. You know, and you know, it's much more welcoming if they can do that. So thank you for that. And Matt, if I could get your input on that point as well.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things I could add. Sorry, I think my connection was going for a second, but I think I'm back. I think things have definitely gotten better in recent years. So I have a similar position to Eloise. I joined KPMG 8 years ago and have stuck around. I'm certainly a fan of working there. I mean, back then it was long phone interviews, an entire day of the assessment center, final interviews with partners, online, like numerical and verbal reasoning tests. And when I was doing those, I wasn't aware of my ADHD diagnosis at that time either. But I think if you look at kind of modern recruitment processes now, and how a lot of employers have kind of transformed away from those kind of traditional ways of assessing people to others, I think that's one indication you can take that an employer is going to genuinely have a better culture and a better way of welcoming you, and also a more fair way of like assessing your merits. So you can always look at what tasks are they going to have, what steps are they going to have, do they seem inclusive, are they couched around inclusive language, does the employer verbally and explicitly encourage you to disclose conditions or issues that you might have so that they can accommodate you, right? So you can always look for those really helpful tips that the company you're looking at like has the kind of culture you would want to be a part of. And another thing that I would add is you can also kind of like look at the associated material around the employer to see how far that culture actually makes it around other corners of the business, right? So a lot of companies will have very nice and pretty like recruitment sites, right, to get, you know, new young graduates interested. But do you see like the same commitment to those values in other kinds of output of the company, right? So for example, does the company display transparency and honesty talking about their pay gaps, for example? And so that would be a good way of understanding, have they just gotten someone who knows how to write this stuff really well to do up their recruitment site? Or do leaders in that company actually do a pretty good job of cascading those values like across the whole business and not just specifically where there is like a benefit to the company's bottom line to like look a certain way? So I'd
Oh, I think we've lost Matt, but that just at the end of a very important point, I think really useful. So yeah, I think like you said, if even if a company, you know, has their recruitment process online and they have information, it's important to also assess the tone and the language used as well. And yeah, that's really important. And I'd like to come to Lauren as well for an additional point on that. If you haven't discovered a kind of a tone or a culture set by an employer from their website, would you encourage applicants to, you know, send an email or reach out and have an open dialogue about whether or not they are supportive of neurodivergent applicants?
Yeah, I think, and something we really encourage across IBM as a whole is, you know, if someone finds you on LinkedIn and reaches out to you, you know, we want to be able to help you at the end of the day. So, you know, reach out to if you can find a current intern or a current graduate on LinkedIn, or if there's any other websites that you go on where you can speak to current employees, you know, do your research, reach out to them, because you're likely to get a genuine answer rather than a very corporate, you know, like Matt said, rather than the corporate website. You know, you're going to get a genuinely human answer from people. So absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, really important points. Thank you all for your insights on those. That's really interesting. And so what we'll move on to next is, as Gemma mentioned earlier, a bit about disclosure. So would you advise candidates for internships, graduate programs, for example, to disclose their condition during the recruitment process, and kind of why they potentially should, when they could, and how they'd go about doing that? So if I start this one off with Anne, if you'd like to give a little insight as to what you would say.
We actively encourage candidates to disclose through the application process. One, to ensure that we can make any reasonable adjustments. We'd reach back out to that candidate then, because that candidate is the expert in what they require. Also to share that then with our assessors, etc. And what's come out of the recent work that we've been doing recently is we've also realised that a number of our assessors are neurodivergent. So it's sometimes matching them up. And it's changing the whole environment that candidate's coming into, not just for that candidate, for all candidates, because I think it goes across the piece. So definitely disclose up front. And there's only so much that some candidates would like to disclose. There's some candidates are kind of loath to actually disclose within the application process. So even post-offer process, we reach back out, because one thing we've learned is that conversation is critical. So reaching back out and having an open conversation to say, okay, you've now got your offer, but what else would you like us to know about to enable your day one to be a great day for you? So it works on both sides as well. Our assessor group, we're working with those as well to sort of change things up. It can be something simple like please don't go to an interview suited and booted, because your candidate's going to show up in a sweatshirt. So yeah.
Definitely. Great. Thank you for that. And Gemma, it'd be useful if I could get some of your insight as well, with your leadership background, as to what you would say for someone thinking about whether or not they should disclose during the recruitment process, and when would you potentially say, or is it different between employers and when they're comfortable disclosing?
I think, coming back to Matt's point on the last question, I think the more research you do, the greater understanding and appreciation for actually what that where they are in their ED&I journey, if you like, will really help support the answer to that question. If I put my ambassador hat on, take me away from my own employer and company at the moment, I feel that you should consider whether it benefits you either during the process or within your employment, as to whether you should disclose that information. You know, what is it going to positively impact your working environment? Will it give you access to accommodations? Will it opportunity to connect with a supporting community within that organisation? And it might be that if you do enough research, you feel very comfortable in disclosing it up front. Or it might be that you subtly ask questions throughout the recruitment process to understand what their commitment, their focus is around ED&I, or specifically neurodivergent, before you then determine whether to disclose that answer. But it's not one size fits all. And really, the more research you have and alignment that you have to that organisation, the more comfortable you will naturally feel to disclose or not.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really valuable point, actually, to consider yourself first and what will benefit you and what will help you. So that's really useful, something I hadn't considered. So yeah, thank you for that. And Eloise, if I come to you lastly for that one, I know you said you've had experience with applying. What kind of advice would you give on disclosure for those job hunting?
Yeah, I would agree with Gemma. It's definitely not one size fits all. I think it is a personal decision. I think if I could go back and tell myself, I don't think that would necessarily have helped me in that moment, because I didn't understand what that meant for me. But I think if you are someone that does know what that means for you, maybe it is helpful to say, because then you can kind of unlock that support that you need. I think now, if I was going to go for a new job, I don't think I'd ever hide it. I would always say, because I think the reaction to saying also tells you a lot about that company. And I would rather find out in the interview stage that maybe we're not a match than get somewhere and then find that out, because I think that would be more difficult to deal with when you're further into it. But it is a very personal decision. And I think you need to think about how it makes you feel either way. Like, do you feel that you want to, or do you not?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an important closing point on that talking point. So thank you for that, Eloise. And so our next talking point we have touched on a bit previously when discussing everyone's companies, and it's about reasonable adjustments. And I know we've kind of touched on, it could be something really small, it could be to do with headphones, it could be to do with working in a quieter room, like you mentioned, but it would be important for those watching to mention what reasonable adjustments your company does have in place in the recruitment process, and whether there is an open dialogue about flexibility with that, adding more, or if I could start with Lauren on this one, if you could give us a little bit of insight as to the reasonable adjustments you have in place.
Yeah, so there's a few different ones really that you can look into, but the easiest thing that we can say is, if you need extra time for reading, we can offer that. If things need to be on a certain color background because of color blindness, or if it needs to be in a certain font, just let us know, because we can always, we're doing our best. Obviously, we're on a learning journey as well in terms of how to provide the best support, and we're always willing to take feedback. And you'll see that even when you call it out, it will help us with future prospects as well. We've done sessions before where we've been able to send out a picture of your interviewer and their name beforehand, so people are comfortable knowing who they're going to talk to, and they can look them up on LinkedIn, for example, and get to know them, or even sending out an example list of the questions that we might cover, so you feel more comfortable coming into that interview, because it is daunting. It is very worrying sometimes, and I get anxious when I'm interviewing people, let alone the people that are being interviewed. So it's like we say, that there's lots and lots of different options on offer, and I think it is all about talking to that recruiter, talk to the people that are organising those days. We actively come out as IBM and say to you, look, is there anything that you would like to make us aware of? This is the activities to expect on the day. Do you need any adjustments to that, so that you know what to expect, and then we know how we can help. And even if it's it's the displays, it's anything that we can change that is reasonable and doesn't give you that advantage, but also allows you to perform to your best on that particular day.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that seems clear kind of across the board is that companies are encouraging an open dialogue with recruiters and managers as to what they need and what would best benefit them. So that's really important. Thank you. Matt, if I come to you for the kind of reasonable adjustments you have in place at KPMG.
Yeah, my experience of reasonable adjustments is more in terms of like the course of daily employment, as opposed to adjustments to recruitment processes. But I am aware that those exist, and recruiters open dialogues with people to understand what those adjustments might be. Particularly because I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, even quite large companies are still on their journey, learning how their processes need to adapt in order to capture all the things that they need to capture. Right. And so I think the trend at the moment, at least that I've seen, is that there are these open dialogues because companies know that they haven't figured out all the answers yet. They haven't rewritten all processes and all the policies they might need, because people might need adjustments that they're not kind of aware of. So there's definitely that. In terms of day-to-day stuff, I know that I've had coaching and support from like counsellors with companies that we partner with. I've had like occupational health assessments covered by KPMG. And folks with other kind of conditions are also like offered like a wealth of different things that match it. So like specialist software for folks with dyslexia, mapping software, things like that. So there is a wealth of stuff out there. It all kind of just relies on your ability to kind of actively take part in a conversation to understand what might be available and then to get it. And companies are better at letting you know that it's okay to have the conversation, because relying on people to take the first step and ask for something is very tricky, because they're not aware in the first instance what potential repercussion for disclosing something might be. And I think that trend of companies starting that conversation is becoming more and more common, which is a really good sign of progress.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you touched on kind of adjustments that can be made day to day as well as the recruitment process, because of course it's equally as important to kind of have that consistency in conversation and adjustments when you've started at work, as well as when you're applying for the job and going through the recruitment process. So yeah, thank you for that insight. So it looks like we've lost Eloise for the moment, but we'll carry on with the next point. So it's kind of a more general advice point as to what kind of advice and tips you'd give to neurodivergent students who want to showcase their strengths during the recruitment process. So it'd be great to have everyone's kind of insight on this. So I'll go clockwise around my screen again. So if I start with Lauren for this one and go around.
So showcasing strengths. I think during there'll be various points in the process that you need to show us yourself, but just don't be afraid to put your passions across. I recruited in the last couple of years for software developers, and they were sending me their GitHub pages, and they were showing me various YouTube videos, things that they've done, and Discord servers. If that's your thing, show us. We're really interested to know who you are and what you're doing. And if you're really good at something, tell us, shout about it. And we're getting to know you, and we want to know who we're working with and what drives them. And I think just don't be afraid to talk about the things that you're passionate about. That's probably my biggest kind of piece of advice there.
Yeah, definitely, and really useful, I think, because it can be daunting thinking about the skills and qualities and everything that you think you need for a job, and actually it's just as important for an employer to know who you are and your character and what you're good at and what you're confident in. So yeah, that's really important. Thank you. So if I go to Gemma next for your advice on kind of showcasing strengths during the recruitment process.
Just building actually on what Lauren said there around kind of owning your neurodiverse strengths. This is your superpower. We can all sit there and think about what the developmental areas are that we have, and generally they come to mind straight away for everyone, but it sometimes isn't clear what our strengths are. And I have conversations all the time with a real diverse mix of people who just don't see the strengths that they have. And I think when you identify what they are, you think about what your passions are and you really drill into them, you start to see where they're transferable and where they can have big positive impact on a business. If you can translate that for a client, that's really powerful. For example, typically a neurodiverse individual will have perhaps pattern recognition, or creativity, or analytical thinking, or a strong problem solver. These are all key power skills that are in demand now and will continue to be in demand in the future. Know your worth, talk about it, bring it to life, get a career coach. It's something we offer at Grace. I'm sure many of the people on the call offer something similar. They will help you harness and understand that, talk about it over and over again. And like I said to you before, building a community around you of individuals who are in a similar position to you will help you to identify what those are. So I'd say that that's probably a really empowering area to really showcase your strengths. But first you need to identify what they are.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Very valuable advice there. Thanks. So for Anne, if you'd like to give your input on showcasing strengths during the recruitment process and when you're in the workplace as well, just kind of in general.
I love Gemma's description there, the superpowers, because that's absolutely what we're looking for, the creativity and the different facets that these individuals bring to the business. So be yourself, that passion's got to be through when you're showcasing through the assessment centre or through the recruitment process. One thing we built in as well is optional drop-in sessions prior to these assessments, so that candidates can engage with us and talk to us, and that breaks down some of those barriers, and that way they're totally comfortable to absolutely be themselves on the day. And there's a range of activities that they'll go through, and if I can give you an example of a standout creativity passionate individual, when we asked them to do a technical presentation and they came in and presented on how to teach a Pokemon to catch a ball, it blew everybody away. But that was the passion, the drive, the creativity, and then cleverly linking that into how that would fit within our business.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that story as well. And Matt, if we go over to you for advice you'd give for showcasing strengths.
Yeah, I mean, trying as hard as I can not to repeat the good points that have already been made. I think one thing I'd add is it can help to think about, if you know what your strengths are, think with clarity about how to make them observable. So this kind of follows on from the point about observing and understanding and researching what the recruitment processes are, what tasks and what steps and what tests are in that process, and what strength do you think they are going to pick out, right? So if you have, for example, an ability to kind of tunnel vision and hyper focus on quite difficult technical problems, and you're applying for a financial job and there's a financial modeling test, well, then that's a process which is probably going to pull your strength right out of you without you needing to do any extra work. But then, if you have strengths around things like emotional intelligence, or the ability to relate to your team, that might be quite tricky. And so then it will involve planning and thinking beforehand. What stage is the process going to be my opportunity to try and help this shine through, given that it's not going to get pulled out by itself, without me doing anything. And I guess one thing on this is that the most open part of the process is an interview. It's the most flexible and open-ended opportunity you have to showcase things which are maybe not going to get pulled out of like with a test or something. And a lot of that can just be like confidence and practice at being able to cope with interviews so that you're more confident to still with like humility, but talk about, you know, where you work that shows you believe what you're saying, but you have these extra friends that you want to talk about and talk about why you think you have them and the evidence that they've kind of had during your past. After that, it's often just practice. If you're going to need to rely on the interview stage to try and get your unconventional strengths and aspects to shine, because then it's not going to happen automatically, then understanding you develop more of that practice and skill can be a helpful way for you to prepare.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And it's back to that thing again, to showcase your own strengths and you know, showcase the areas that you're most confident in and that you know you can perform best at. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Eloise, last but not least, if you have any, I know we've kind of covered a few points there, but anything additional you think is important to mention?
Yeah, there's so many things I could say. I think what I will say is even if all those things, those really great tips we just heard, you do them all, even if they're not working, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're not doing the right things. You just haven't found like where you're supposed to be just yet. And the knockbacks and the rejections, like, they are really hard to deal with, and you should, you know, let yourself deal with them. But one day, like, you'll look back and you'll think, yeah, that makes sense to me now. Like, I feel I'm doing well in my role and I'm doing well in the company. I'm able to use my strengths now where I am. But when I was interviewing, I just kept getting told no all the time. But yeah, it doesn't mean there's something wrong. You're just not where you're going to be valued, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful kind of closing statement on that point. So thank you for that, Eloise. And our final point is, again, kind of a general one, but equally as important as everything else we've been talking about. I'll kind of get maybe 2 or 3 responses just so we can go to questions. But the final talking point is what career advice you give to neurodivergent students and graduates on being successful in the workplace. I know, you know, Matt's already touched on that there can be adjustments while you're in the workplace, but just general advice on succeeding once you've started work. So if I come across to Matt first, actually, if you'd like to say anything on that one.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things. One important one is we already talked about disclosure during the recruitment process. I think more broadly, disclosure in work full stop is like a big thing that I think folks in this group are obviously going to be thinking about a lot all the time. And it's not something you're going to have to do once. It's something you'll probably have to do again and again and again. And every time it's going to be slightly different. And what I would say is that in all cases, treat it as like a new self-focused risk-reward calculus every time. There's no reason to adopt the principle in favor of disclosing and being open, because the world being as it is, that's not always going to be the way for you to best secure your own interests and your own success. And then in other cases, it probably is going to be a good idea, right? So, for example, in thinking about whether your employer has quite strong walls between HR functions and other functions is a really important thing to think about. Can you successfully disclose to the HR arms of a company and get things like adjustments and recognition of important aspects of you without the crossing over the gap in the folks that you have to work with, consider your promotion, things like that. And the other thing is, you're getting understanding what the potential risks and rewards of disclosing might be, and kind of getting your finger on the pulse of a company, especially when you're starting, can be quite tricky. There's a lot of stuff you don't know. There's a lot of people that you don't know, and your kind of experience early on is kind of fraught with risk. You're trying to make a good first impression, like every couple of hours. Finding like a network of other people in the firm that experience like the same struggles and problems, but have had like a long experience of handling them, can give you like a massive jump start in getting that understanding, so that you can make accurate estimations about what the risks and rewards of disclosing in any situation might be. And in KPMG, we have like a pretty thriving neurodiversity community. I'm sure in other companies they'll exist as well. And so if you can find those communities for advice in the first instance, that could be really helpful.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Matt. And Lauren, if I could come to you for a kind of final input on that as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think for me, and what I always share with my students and graduates is it's just about communicating it. If you feel comfortable to communicate it, then we can help put those adjustments in place for you, and we can help give you the best start to your career as possible. We've got a lot of execs, senior leaders at the moment that are finding out that they're being diagnosed with various with neurodivergence, and they're coming out as sponsors and and really trying to embrace this across the business. So I think just communicate, even with your manager, even if you're not comfortable with the rest of your team knowing, and the support is there and the acceptance is there, and just it's not going to go against you. It's not, especially within IBM. Kind of diversity and inclusion is a foundation of what one of our cultures, like principles of our culture. So we would just encourage you to be as open as possible, and then we can support you in the best way possible.
Definitely. Thank you guys for those. So that's really helpful advice across the board there from all of you. I'd just like to say thank you again for all of your advice and inputs around those talking points. Really useful and really valuable for those watching, I'm sure. So thank you. I am just going to go over to a few questions that I can see now. So I will just open it up to everyone on the panel to kind of chip in if you feel like you have anything you'd like to input. So quite an important question around anxiety we've got here actually, which is, how did any of you cope with anxiety of interviews, not making eye contact, and how did you stop getting burnt out in a job? I think if we just stick to anxiety in interviews and how to kind of combat that. So I'll leave that one open to you guys.
I could say really quickly, practice. Whilst I was at school and university, I did a lot of competitive debating. It was really intense and difficult and challenging and stressful, but it's a much safer environment in which to fail at public speaking before you're in situations where your ability to speak in interviews matters. A lot of performing well in interviews is remaining calm and not being consumed by the thought of like the negative repercussions of a mistake. And often it's just getting used to the feeling of being observed whilst you're speaking. And as the feeling becomes more and more normal, it stops being so consuming in your mind and you can focus things. Sorry for a second there. But yeah, that was my point.
Sorry, I think there was a delay there, so I didn't mean to cut you off. That was a great point. So thank you. So this is quite an interesting one as well, actually. Could you talk a little bit more about the support in the employment world, which is not focused on extracting or enhancing unique skills, for example, personally rather than professionally supportive resources within employment processes? I know we've touched on the kind of more personal aspect when dealing with recruiters and managements, but it'd be kind of useful to hear some insight on that question, if anyone would like to kickstart that one.
Yeah, I think especially if you join as a early professional, so intern, graduate, apprentice within IBM, we have a lot of early professional communities that focus not just on professional skills but on your personal skills as well. So that could be like looking at your presentation, you go in and you practice with other interns, other graduates. So it's kind of that safe space. So there's lots and lots of different kind of communities within the scheme that enable you to practice things in that safe space without being out with those managers in the business and feeling under pressure. So that's been really, really beneficial for not just neurodivergent people but everybody within the team, and it's making a difference.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. And so the next question we have, it's a slightly long one, but I think it's quite interesting, and perhaps Eloise, it'd be quite useful to get some insight on this one. So it says, what would your advice be for people who got diagnosed late into uni and started coping with their neurodivergence late, and so may not have the consistency of work experience and productive societies as neurotypicals? So they've mentioned that their neurodivergence has resulted in being rejection sensitive and prone to a very diverse range of societies and work rather than kind of traditional ones in their industry. So how should this inconsistency be presented in an application or interview? It's quite an important point. So if you'd like to kind of give any advice you've got.
I'll try, because there's a lot in there.
Yeah, sorry.
For a long time about that. Yeah, I guess my advice for being later diagnosed, I think, especially around the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think that's what you're mentioning there, is just to be kind to yourself when you can feel that that's happening. Because I had that quite a lot, and I really was very down. I really didn't think I was going to be where I am now. I couldn't see a future going forward for myself in work. I just thought no one was ever going to give me a job, and I couldn't get through the interviews. I was trying so hard and getting nowhere. I think that you just need to keep going, push through, and you will get that opportunity to shine. And then when you have it, like, you'll look back and think, I'm glad I kept going. It is really difficult, especially with RSD, because it's, some people have like a physical reaction. I have that too. It can really like overtake, and you can't really control your emotions. So that is difficult. But I would just say, be kind to yourself. That's the first thing. And then I'm just trying to read the rest of it. How should this inconsistency be presented in an application? I would say, if you think that you're going to, the interview is going to be difficult for you to do, I would say that is probably a sign that you should say something to the interviewers, so that they have the opportunity to offer you support, to ask you the question, what can they do to help you? Because it's not really so much about you at this, it's about them being able to create that environment for you to thrive. And if they can't do that, then, like we say, maybe that isn't the employer that's going to be able to support you through your career journey. I hope that helps. It's a big question.
No, it's a big one. I think you've done a good job there at breaking that down. But yeah, as you said, it can be daunting anyway, going through any application process, and it's as daunting as it might be to have an open dialogue. You might save yourself time and energy if the employer wasn't right for you, or you might find that they are the employer for you and you found out as early as you can. So I think that's really important advice. So thank you for that. We have another slightly long one, but I will try and break it down as to what it's getting at. I think it's a question about the kind of negative aspects of neurodiversity kind of being pushed more in conversation. So it says, from my experience, people push for diversity and highlight the positive points of being neurodiverse, but they ignore more quote unquote negative aspects of neurodiverse in the workplace, for example, meltdowns and burnouts. So how can we advocate for less appealing parts of neurodivergence and start conversations that might not look at the full picture of being neurodiverse, which I think is quite an interesting point there, if anyone would like to answer that one.
Sorry, I'd just like to say that you have to recognize that there are two sides to the neurodiverse candidate then. So absolutely embrace that you will encounter meltdowns, etc. So to accommodate for that, so for example, within your assessment center, you have a breakout area, have somewhere where somebody can go and breathe, and maybe somebody to accompany them in that area, to just have that time out, and also ensure that the assessors are aware that they might need to take time to breathe, consider before they respond. So it's just setting the scene really, but recognizing that there are two sides to this.
Definitely, thank you. That's really helpful, Anne. And Gemma, I know you had something that you'd like to input as well.
Building on what Anne said, I think it's about also communicating clearly your coping strategies, because everyone is different, and this isn't just limited to those who are neurodivergent. I think someone could be going through something at home that creates a different emotion that perhaps may be shown in the workplace, as an example. And it's just communicating that up front, so that the world around you can support you and understand what's in best place for you and not just the collective. I would say that's key. And also for me, I kept my neurodiversity quiet for years in my career, because and I think things are better now, but for a long time everyone just focused on the deficit to what that meant in the world, and I wasn't ready to talk about it because no one else seemed to be talking about it. You're part of the solution. The more we talk about it, the greater awareness that we bring to both sides of the coin, and the greater support that everyone can get when they need it.
That's great, Gemma, thank you. I think, again, a very powerful closing point there. So yeah, thank you for those answers, and hopefully all those insights have been helpful for those watching, quite thorough responses from the panelists there, so thank you. I think we will wrap it up there just so we can kind of close the webinar, but I'd just like to say thank you to Lauren, Gemma, and Eloise and Matt for joining today, for giving us your time and really, really helpful and valuable responses that I'm sure have been helpful to all of those watching. And thank you for those watching. I hope you found today's webinar useful. I know that Gemma and Matt have put some of their responses to questions in the chat box as well. So do check those out just before we leave if there's anything that you would like a bit more context on. But yeah, that is all we have time for today. I would just like to mention that next week, next Thursday at 2 p.m. the same time, there is an upcoming webinar for a CV workshop. So yeah, that's next week, next Thursday at 2 p.m. Let me just check the date. I think that should be 6th of July. So yeah, you can head over to Target Jobs events to join on that one. So yeah, thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank
Bye for
you.
now.